Hi folks, in Chapter 4 we're going to look at propositions and arguments. Now in this session we're going to introduce some basic terminology involved in the field of logic, and it's very important to understand these terms, get them down because we're going to use them throughout the course, and hopefully you'll use them later on in life. When you have a friendly debate with someone, you'll be able to use the correct terminology. So the first term we need to understand is a proposition. And like many English terms, it has more than one meaning. But in logic, a proposition is a claim. You're claiming that something is the case. It's a statement that's either true or false. Although you may not know which it is. That's okay, but it is either true or false. And so if I said, I have a $10 bill in my pocket, I'm making a claim. It is therefore a proposition. Now you don't know right off the bat if it's true or false. Frankly, I may not even know if it's true or false if I haven't checked my pockets lately. But it is either true or false. And so it is a proposition. If I said the sun is hot, that's a proposition. And of course we might have to specify, well, how hot constitutes hot? What temperature constitutes hot? But I think by almost any reasonable definition, the sun is indeed hot. That's a true proposition. If I said all dogs are black, I'm making a truth claim. Now that is a proposition. It happens to be a false proposition, but it is a proposition because it's making a claim. Now, some things that people say are not propositions. Questions are not propositions. If I ask you, is the sun a star? I'm not claiming anything. I'm not claiming the sun is a star. I'm asking a question. So it's not something you could evaluate as true or false. Not a claim. Commands are not propositions. If I said, eat your dinner, well, I'm not claiming that you are eating your dinner. I'm telling you what to do. I'm giving you an instruction. That's not a proposition. Propositions are statements, claims that are either true or false. And it's important to recognize that a proposition is the meaning of the claim, independent of exact wording. So it's kind of nice we don't have to worry about the nuances of the wording as long as we understand the meaning. So if I said my car is a Toyota, and if I said it is the case that my car is a Toyota, those are two different sentences, but they're the same proposition because they have the same meaning. I could say it like Yoda. I could say, my car a Toyota is. That's the same proposition as saying my car is a Toyota because it has the same meaning. So exact wording isn't important as long as the meaning is the same. You have the same proposition. Now, interestingly, you can actually have two sentences that are identical but are different propositions. So I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because you can have two sentences that are different, that are the same proposition, but you can also have two sentences that are identical that are different propositions. And the example that I gave in the book, I think it's a pretty good one, is if Mike says, my favorite color is blue, and then Annie says, well, my favorite color is blue. Now those two sentences are absolutely identical, but they have different meanings. Because when Mike says, my favorite color is blue, he means Mike's favorite color is blue. And when Annie says my favorite color is blue, she means Annie's favorite color is blue. And that is a different claim. It might be true that Mike's favorite color is blue and false that Annie's favorite color is blue. Those are different propositions, and they could have different truth values. So a proposition is a truth claim, and it's the meaning of the claim regardless of exact wording. Any proposition is either true or false, but you may not know whether it's true or false. That's not required. If I said the number of stars in the visible universe is an even number as opposed to an odd number, well, that's a proposition. It's either true or false. It's just that no one other than God knows whether that is true or false, because we can't. There's too many stars for us to count. Now, in logic, one of the things that we do, in fact, one of the main things that we do, is use propositions that we know are true to prove propositions that are in question. This is called an argument. So an argument is a sequence of propositions where the truth of one depends on the truth of the others. And that's very different from what the word argument means in some other contexts, right? Because sometimes we use the word argument to mean an emotionally heated debate, a yelling match. So you might say, Tim and John got into a terrible argument this morning, and I thought it was going to come to blows. Well, that's not what we mean in logic, okay? So when we talk about an argument, we're not talking about something that's emotionally heated. And in fact, in logic, we need to recognize that we need to stay away from emotionally heated debates because emotions can distract. They can cause you to make mistakes in reasoning. Not that emotions are bad, but they can cause you to make mistakes, errors in logic. So we need to stay away from that. It's kind of interesting that the word argument. It conjures up those images because we're not supposed to be argumentative in the sense of contentious, but we should make arguments. The Bible tells us to do that in 1 Peter 3:15, that when we are given an answer from the Greek word apologia, meaning to give a defense, that's referring to a logical argument. So an argument is a sequence of propositions where the truth of one depends on the truth of the others. Let me give you an example. All mammals have kidneys. All dogs are mammals. Therefore, all dogs have kidneys. That's an argument. It has three propositions, and the final proposition, therefore all dogs have kidneys, is proved from the previous two. If indeed it's the case that all mammals have kidneys, and if indeed it's the case that all dogs are mammals, then it would have to be the case that all dogs have kidneys. That follows logically. If the first two propositions are true, the third one is true as well. In an argument, the proposition that you're trying to prove is called the conclusion. And in this case, it's therefore all dogs have kidneys. That's what I'm trying to prove. I take it for granted that the other two propositions are true, that everyone knows that all mammals have kidneys, and everyone knows that all dogs are mammals, and I'm trying to prove to you, therefore all dogs have kidneys. Often there are certain words that indicate that a proposition is in fact the conclusion. And one of the most common is the word therefore. When you see the word therefore, you know that what follows from it is supposed to be the conclusion of an argument. But there are other words as well. You could use the word so, or hence, thus, consequently, it follows that. Those are some common words and phrases that indicate that what comes next is the conclusion. But it's not required. You can state a conclusion without any kind of prefix whatsoever. Now, the propositions that are used to prove the conclusion are called premises. Each one is a premise. Now, in the example above, the premise was all mammals have kidneys. That's a premise. And all dogs are mammals. That's a premise. And I'm trying to prove, therefore, all dogs have kidneys. That's the conclusion. Now, often a premise will have a prefix, though not always, and that identifies it as a premise. And those would include words like since, given, because, due to the fact that, we know. Those would indicate that you're dealing with a premise. But often there's no indicator at all. And so I find it very helpful to actually identify the conclusion first, and then everything else is a premise. So in the example that I used, all mammals have kidneys, that's the first premise. All dogs are mammals, that's the second premise. Therefore, all dogs have kidneys, that's the conclusion. And again, it's often helpful to identify the conclusion first, because it will often have a word like therefore, so, hence, thus. And then everything else that's used to support that conclusion is a premise. Look for words like therefore. But in any case, even if they're not there, just think to yourself, what is this argument trying to prove? That's the conclusion. Everything else is a premise. Now, the particular argument I gave had two premises and one conclusion, and that is very common in logic, but it's not required. An argument can have any number of premises. It has to have at least one, up to as many as you can count. There's no upper limit on premises. But an argument will have exactly one conclusion. If it doesn't have a conclusion, it's not an argument. If it has more than one conclusion, it's more than one argument. So if you see two therefores in a chain, you actually have two arguments there. And that's okay. You can chain arguments together. That's actually pretty common as well. To make an argument and establish the conclusion, and then you can use that conclusion as a premise in another argument. You can chain them together, and that's called a sorites. A sorites is a chain of arguments where the conclusion of one is used as a premise in the next one, and so on and so forth. And so, for example, after I've proved that all dogs have kidneys, I might go on and use that as a premise. All dogs have kidneys. My pet Spot is a dog, therefore Spot has kidneys. And that would be quite correct. And so when you chain those together, that's a sorites. Now, a good argument has true premises and a conclusion that follows logically from those premises. If any premise is false, then the conclusion is unreliable. So, for example, if I said, all dogs are cats, Spot is a dog, therefore Spot is a cat. Now, that does follow logically. If it were true that all dogs are cats, and if it were true that Spot is a dog, then it would follow that Spot is also a cat. But, of course, that first premise is false and rather absurd. So we say the conclusion is unreliable. And in this case, it's false. But keep in mind that an unreliable conclusion just means it's not proved. You don't know that it's true. A conclusion could be true by accident. You can have a bad argument that just happens to have a correct conclusion anyway, but it isn't really proved. So, for example, if I said, all dogs are black, my pet Spot is a dog, therefore, Spot is black. Now, the first premise that all dogs are black is false, because you can have other colors of dogs, but it might be the case that my dog Spot really is black. And so the conclusion is true by accident. But we would say it hasn't been established by that argument. The argument is bad, and therefore the conclusion is unreliable. Now, the other way an argument can be bad, even if all its premises are true, is if the conclusion doesn't logically follow from those premises. And that's called a fallacy. And we will spend a great deal of time dealing with fallacies because they are very, very common.